Hi. Um, Come to this, whatever it is. Bear with me. This is the first time I've recorded my own face, so I'm really awkward. um, so disclaimer, I'm recording this on my phone because it's the best camera I have. The alternative would be this, which I got like 2012, 2013. So like I don't know how good the quality would be. Going to be talking about what I read in March as well as January and February. Why didn't I do a what did I read in January and February when those months end? Well, I only read 2 books in January and 4 books in February. It wasn't great months for me. And so I just figured I'd do them all together now. I read 13 books in March, which is a lot. I peaked in March. So I'm going to go through the books, list them, talk about them a little bit, so what I rated them, and so I started this book in December and finished it in January, which was She Drives Me Crazy by Kelly Quindle, which is a sapphic romance, and it's fake dating and it's a cheerleader and a basketball player. I really like this. I rated it 4.25, and it allowed me to live out my basketball dreams. I can't. Oh shit! I forgot to introduce myself. And I'm Milo. I use pronouns he, him, they, them. This is a mess. The next book I read was Jan&Feb Go Outside. Well, because I got it that month. I had gotten Tabanoff in sometime last year, probably like March or April. I can't remember the specific time. And I got this in January, secondhand. And I was really. And I'm firmly back into my Jan&Feb. That sounds really weird. But it's probably not a shock to anyone who's looked at my playlists, which I have public. I rated this 5 stars. I rated Tabanoff also 5 stars if anyone's interested, but again that was last year. The first book I read in February was oh no, Daisy. You know, I figured you'd show up, but you know, not in like the 3rd book. It's comforting. I'm not in front of the camera anymore. Always sitting on things. This is my crazy cat assistant who likes sitting on all of the books I read. Daisy, I need you to move. Like, either sit over here or off the desk, please. Because I need to record a video. Well, I don't need to, but I want to. You gonna stay up there, please? Alright, so the second book I read in February was The Pride, Season 1, which is basically a superhero group that is made up of queer members. And they're dealing with discrimination in like both real life and in the superhero world, which feels kind of weird to me because superheroes are always really queer coded in any way. I rated this 4 stars. It was okay. The second book I read the second book I read in February, which I started in January, was You Will Get Through This Night by Daniel Howell, which I rated 5 stars. This is obviously the self-help mental health guide by Daniel Howell, who was, I don't know, he did YouTube stuff, he does Jan&Feb games. Wish I read this sooner. Going to reread it at some point. The third book I read, which I don't physically own because I gave it away, is a book called Crush by Richard Sicken, which I rated 2.75, which is a poetry book that was like 85 pages. I didn't particularly like it. I found it uncomfortable and I didn't really understand, which is why I got rid of it. And the third book I read in February was the fourth book I read in February was A Marvelous Light by Freya Marksky. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which is also something I started in January. I actually started it before I read You Will Get Through This Night, but I put this on hold because I wanted to finish this. But obviously it took me a while, and I read a comic book. So I get through comics fairly quickly. That's mainly why I read it. I rated this 4.5. I find it very... It's an adult romance, and it's set in the 1900s, before in England. So it's a historical romance. Let's see. And that is everything I read in January and February. So going on to the books that I actually read this past month, which was I started and finished A Marvelous Light, which is the sequel to A Restless Truth, which is a sequel to A Marvelous Life by the same author. But this one is sapphic when this one's gay. And it is a sequel. That there is a third book which I'm currently reading. I also rated this one 4.5. Yes, 4.5. And I want to read both of them. It is a complete series, even though it does follow different protagonists. You will have to read the first one to understand what's happening in the second one, and obviously with the third one as well. That's the next book I read in March was Seraph of the End, Volume 28, which is the most recent issue of a manga that I am currently reading and have been reading since like 2018, and it has been going on for over 10 years. It's basic. I rated this 5 stars, by the way. It's basically it's set in an apocalypse world where everyone over the age of like 8 years prior to the main events of the story, there was a plague that took out everyone over the age of 12. I think that's and then the world was enslaved by vampires. And the main characters are then captured by vampires, and two of the main characters, and they have to traverse this apocalypse world fighting vampires, and as well there's also demons and just monsters, angels. It's really good. I really enjoyed it. It's very graphic. I believe that there is an anime adaptation, but I think there's only 2 seasons, at least on Netflix. I don't know about if that is true, but I know in England on Netflix there's only 2 seasons available, I think, at the moment. I haven't really looked. So the next book I read after this was, I'm gonna think this is weird, Tales of the Pizza Flex, the Body Box Conclusion, #5, which I rated 4 stars. I read the first 4 of these ones specifically, like, the beginning of last year, and I was picking this up. It was a standard FNAF read, I suppose. GGY, which is in this, was not as good as I thought it would be. The storyteller was a lot more interesting, and I don't know if it's because I came back to it a year later and didn't bother reading the first part of the Buddy Box, but that wasn't that interesting, and obviously her kinky curls. What? These books are very interesting. And following up from that, I've also read the sixth one in the Pizza Puff series, Nexie. What can I say? The children in Nexie, which I also read. I also rated this 4 stars. Children in Nexie are apparently supposed to be like 8 or 9 years old. They're not written like they're 8 or 9 years old. Also, which I know why they wanted to make them 8 or 9 years old, because something very specific they want to happen in the story would only really work if they were that age, but they act as if they're like 12 or 13, which isn't good. What happens in Drowning? Drowning, the second story, was very interesting in comparison, and it felt very drawn out. No, that's not the right word. They could have strung the story together, and obviously the last story was Mimic, which felt very rushed. And the next 2 books I read, I'm doing a 2-in-1, was a reread of The Amazing Book Is Not on Fire and Dapko. And I'm not sorry. I kept the same ratings, and I'm really happy that I reread these, and I'm going to reread them again, if not this month, next month. I know that some of the stuff in here is a little dated, kind of, but most of it is still fantastic. Like you know, when Dan, if you watch them, you should watch them. They're good. Jokes about becoming like running off and becoming like a self-published furry smut writer. Like, he could do it because I know he could do it because I've read The Urge, which is the fan fiction he did. You can find the audio thing on his channel, which is it's really good. And when I read these, it makes me feel like I'm a part of something, which feels kind of silly, but it is just the truth. Can you see? Oh, you can see that. I kept the same ratings, which I think I've already said. Yeah, I love these books. The next 3 books I read. Were the fifth, no, yes, 4th, 5th, and 6th issues of the MHA manga, which I rated all of them 4 stars. I didn't technically read these because I'd watched the anime before this, and I did read the first 3 as well. I read them in last year as well. So I did technically skim read these, because here's a good thing about anime. They usually will adapt things like perfectly off of like a manga. Like, you can trust it, unlike a book adaptation. Well, I mean a movie adaptation for a book, which is great. So I did just skim read these, and the next manga, which is the 7th one, I should like be in uncharted waters, so I will probably rate it either higher. The next book I read was With This Kiss by Carrie Hope Fletcher, which I rated 3.25. Basically, this isn't a spoil. The main character, Lorelai, can see how people die whenever she kisses them, which for some reason makes her think she's a monster. As I said, I rated this 3.25. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't fantastic. It was alright. it's supposed to be a romance book, but I feel like she didn't spend enough time with the actual love interest for it to be considered a proper romance book. She spends more time trying to figure out what is like her power, witch thing, whatever it is, with her best friend, which was very interesting, but it didn't feel like she had the right motivation for, because it was very insta-lovey, which doesn't really make sense to me because she just met this guy. It doesn't make sense. Why would it just immediately be, oh, I love you? After that, I read Secret Wars, which I rated 3.75. I remember being very uncomfortable when reading this, and confused, mainly because this is a conclusion to the Secret Wars things. I didn't know that when I bought it. But generally with comics, especially ones that have been going on for as long as they have been going on for, which I think is the 60s. I think it's best just to pick up a random one and start reading. But I was visually confused and uncomfortable when this was going on. After that, I read Out of the Blue by Jason June, which I rated 4.75. I loved this so much. It's a queer romance. This character is non-binary, and this character uses he/him, and it's great. Obviously, it's set with a merperson as the love interest, and he's a swimmer, which I probably should have guessed from the pool, and I love it. It's fake dating, obviously, and slight revenge plot, and it wasn't exactly a 5-star read for me because there is slight miscommunication at the end, but generally it is a great read. I would highly recommend reading it, especially if you're really into like queer romance. That sounds weird. The final book I read for March was technically for English, which was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which I rated, I feel like people are going to come for me for this, 3.25. Mainly because this is the second classic I have read ever without help, without it being a class read. Ironic, which I did read it for. The reason I read it for English class is because we were told to read or watch things that are either set in the early, either in the 1800s or the early 1900s. So that's and I was going to write a summary of this for English. Do you know what I did for it instead? I wrote about Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2 instead, because I couldn't wrap my head around this. A lot of people say that this is an enemies to lovers. I don't think it is, because I think they just dislike each other. In my mind, enemies to lovers is knife at throat. In my mind, it's just like she dislikes him because he's rude to her, and then that's kind of it. And then they just slowly over time like each other. But I don't know if I just didn't understand it very well because again, it was published in 1813. It is over 200 years old, and it's not something that I would generally read. I will at some point revisit this, probably with an audiobook instead. To see if I understand it better after hopefully reading a few other classics. It does also have a really nice flop, so pardon me. So that gets a bonus point. It is also the only one that I have written a review for this year, so I thought I would read that out to you, which was, thank Dan and Phil's Undertale Let's Play for getting me through this book. It's my first and only review I've written this year. The reason I say that is because these chapters for this book are really, really short for the most part. Like that is the first chapter of this edition that I have. But because of how wordy it is, it's really hard to get through for me. So every time there was an ad break in one of the Undertale videos, I'd like read a chapter. That is everything that I read. In the month of March plus January and February. Sorry that this is all over the place. Obviously, this is a first video with myself. Myself in it. I will not be doing a monthly TBR thing because I don't generally set them, but I will hopefully, when April is over, I will hopefully at some point do another one of these. I do at one point want to do other videos on here at some point, not just books related, but see, this is the second time that I've ever done things live action, so it's going to be very awkward for a while, and it's going to be very clunky, I guess, for a while, as I get used to talking on camera and hopefully get like better equipment and editing software. And something that I was thinking about doing, which I don't really know to do, is a video explaining what Omegaverse is, specifically for the people who have read Bride and what was it called? The Fake Mate, by the same author who did this. The Fake Mate. So that they know what Omegaverse is, and the fact that from what I've heard about Bride and the Fake Mate, those aren't Omegaverse books, but I want to explain that to the people who don't know what that is. And my cat is going to come over here, so I'm going to end this now.